Hello and welcome to my Yugioh channel. Today we're looking at new skills hopefully Zuzu Boyle will get, and a prediction on what she'll receive within Yu-Gi-Oh! Arc 5 in the new Yu-Gi-Oh! Duel Links world. So the first skill I think she'll have is called Fusion Time. Once every time you take 1,500 life points of damage, you can draw one polymerization from outside your deck to your hand. You cannot draw other cards the turn you activate this effect. So the idea is, Zuzu has a massive fusion following. She was influenced by a duelist that she got beaten by called Julia Crystal, and therefore she preferred to use that as part of her style. The benefits of this strategy would be it guarantees drawing a polymerization to let you fuse on that turn. This is an effect needed because she does have multiple fusion monsters. I think she's got at least 3 or 4 versions, so as we get more of those fusion monsters, it will definitely become a more useful effect. There are multiple fusion monsters as has been specified within the Melodious archetype, so depending on your situation you can actually meet those conditions. They also have different effects, whereas they're consistently different even if you put them against each other. Even in a mirror match, actually there are benefits to using them against even those matches. And it prevents you from relying on adding search cards to polymerization from your deck, avoiding bricking. So for example, things such as Fusion Sage, which just let you search into polymerization again, it would stop you from bricking, which is a massive problem sometimes with having to search for some of these cards. Now, the major disadvantages of this skill are just because you draw into polymerization, it's quite predictable, and it can be countered by cards such as Magic Drain. Remember, with this effect, it lets you search for that card outside of the deck, but you still have to activate it. And since it's treated as just any normal spell card, if you've got cards that can just negate that, even things such as Ultimate Providence, which I believe is very common amongst, I think it's Blue Eyes White Dragon players, there's always ways of negating it. Secondly, relying on taking a set amount of damage will make you susceptible to being dominated by the opponent, who may be waiting on their key cards to draw into. So the longer you wait to try and build up the amount of damage you take to get this skill off, the more likely your opponent is going to draw into that favourable card, which they can either OTK you or put you into a difficult position enough where you cannot react to them. And lastly for it, fusing is how Zuzu wins most of her games. If you can take out the fusion monster through cards such as Bottomless Trap Hole or Fiendish Chain, then there is often no way for her to recover. The fusion monsters are basically how she wins most of her games. I don't think these days she tends to use the big bulky ones like the level 7 and the level 8 monsters. More so, she just kind of focuses on that. It's very similar to how I think Alexis from Yu-Gi-Oh! GX used to rely on some of her bulkier Cyber Blader type monsters and the Etal Cyber and cards like that, and instead eventually switched over to her ritual strategy. The next skill I would call Belt One Out. So the idea of this is once per duel you can special summon one Bloom Diva, the Melodious Choir, in attack position. For anyone who isn't aware of the reference, she always used this as a way of kind of saying for Melodious monsters to attack. This is not a Japanese reference, it's actually an American one or an English one, because this was kind of her saying as they gave her within the English translation of the anime. It's a decent enough effect because the fusion monster itself is very powerful. The benefits: this fusion monster can destroy special summon monsters and inflict damage equal to the difference between its attack and this card's. Considering it starts off with only 1,000 attack points, the higher your opponent's attack position monsters have in terms of their attack points, the more damage they're going to get reflective. The other thing is, it does destroy those special summon monsters, which means it's going to be more difficult for them to counter this card. Another benefit is the card itself, Bloom Diva, cannot be destroyed by battle or by card effects, therefore it's incredibly difficult for you to get rid of it. You're going to have to go through multiple forms of negating the effects before you can actually destroy the card itself. and once it's been summoned, it is likely to counter most of your opponent's decks with no consequences. I liken this a lot to the Lunalight deck. I think the big fusion monster they have, the Leo Dancer, is immune to most card effects, and because it starts off with 3,500 attack points, it's often very difficult for your opponent, once this card comes out, to be able to counter that card. The disadvantages of the effect could be it can still be taken down by cards such as Jelly Cannon or Drowning Mirror Force, as these do not destroy by card effect, instead they're intended to return to the hand. Jelly Cannon is basically a watered down version of Drowning Mirror Force, pardon the pun, but it basically means that anytime a monster declares an attack, you can return a monster from the field to the hand. I know it technically comes from the extra deck, but it still applies to that fusion monster. It would still end up going back to the extra deck. And the thing is, Jelly Cannon doesn't rely on your opponent's monster attack. It can be their monster or it can be yours that can trigger off this effect. Another issue is this effect is limited to Zuzu, and therefore it can be very predictable, especially if she starts off with very limited skills, as most characters begin with once they introduce, the new worlds. And lastly, if this effect is used too early or potentially at a poor timing, your opponent is more likely to draw into something they can counter this card with. Instead, you very much have to pick your timings to know as and when this is going to be the most effective use for that skill. And the last skill I think she could have would be called Diva Time. The effect would be when you take 1,500 life points of damage, you can randomly add one melodious monster from your deck to your hand. The benefits of this would be it enables you to draw into a melodious archetype card, which you may not have normal access to within the beginning of the new duel world. Like any situation, you're not going to start off with the entire archetype. You'll get a few pockets of some of the reliable ones, and then some of the better ones might get introduced further on, or at least expanded within the archetype. And the other benefit is most of the melodious monsters have consistent abilities which work well together, meaning no matter which you draw into, you will find a way of working with the card. My major concerns and the disadvantages would be most characters have skills which relate to this effect, therefore it can be very predictable. So you've got other archetypes that do let you do the same thing. Another issue would be the randomness of what you draw can still create issues when you need to be searching for specific cards to actually alter the game state. And lastly, this skill will become very quickly forgotten about as new skills are introduced to this character. Personally, my favourite out of the three skills would be the one called Belt It Out, because that way you're actually summoning into your fusion monster. Neither of the other two are particularly that usable, but we'll have to wait and see what she gets. Whatever you guys think, I'd love to know if you think any of these skills could be something she could get, or if you have your own theories, I'd love to hear those in the comments down below. Like the video if you enjoyed it, and don't forget to subscribe for more daily Yu-Gi-Oh content.